Capsule 1. What is oral communication? As teachers, we must teach and evaluate oral communication and ensure that students develop their oral communication skills. But how is oral communication defined from a didactic standpoint? First of all, it is important to note that oral communication involves both speaking what is said and listening what is heard. Oral communication can be divided into three components: verbal, paraverbal, and nonverbal. The verbal component is the content of the speech. This includes the choice of words and the theme of the speech, as well as its organization. The paraverbal component refers to the voice. It involves, among other things, flow, volume, and intonation. The nonverbal component encompasses body movement, gestures, posture, facial expressions, etc. It is important to note that successful and effective speaking depends on the harmonization, concordance, and coherence of the verbal, paraverbal, and nonverbal components. It is hard to state that one of the three aspects is more important than the others. Some researchers have tried to quantify the effect of each of the three components used in communication. The numbers vary enormously from one researcher to another. It has been found, though, that a contradiction between components causes a perceived lack of credibility in the person speaking, and that nonverbal communication tends to dominate the other components. For instance, if a person is speaking to a group of peers and says, "I'm very happy to be here this morning," with an angry look on their face while trembling and looking towards the ground, the audience will receive the nonverbal messages more acutely regardless of how convincing the spoken message may be. It is therefore essential that the three components of oral communication be consistent. It is also important to mention that oral communication can take different forms. It can take the form of an oralized written language. This can be, for example, a reading aloud or a recitation. It can be a prepared speech, for example, a speech given according to academic expectations. When a teacher asks students to make an oral presentation, it is a prepared speech. Oral communication can also take the form of spontaneous vocalized thinking, also called spontaneous oral communication. This is the case, for example, when students discuss together following a question asked by the teacher. Other characteristics of oral communication include the fact that it can be live or recorded. Oral communication can also be practiced alone or done in groups. Oral communication is also closely linked to culture. Indeed, certain words, expressions, and gestures, for example, may be specific to certain cultures even if the same language is shared. This is the case with eye contact, among other things. For some people, looking a person in the eye may be considered a lack of respect, while for others, it may just be the opposite. Finally, it is important to specify that the teacher, when evaluating a student, cannot have the same expectations for oral productions as for written ones. Oral and written language share some similarities, but they also have their own distinctive characteristics. Indeed, unlike writing, where it is possible to correct and improve your text several times before giving it to someone, oral communication on a daily basis is more spontaneous. Even when speaking is prepared, people's reactions, misunderstanding, or simply forgetting information cause the speaking process to change and adapt. For this reason, oral communication is often referred to as a work in progress. It is therefore quite normal for a person to correct himself, rephrase his remarks, change what was originally planned, repeat information, etc. Speaking will therefore never be perfect. We must avoid believing that it is possible to achieve a flawless speech with perfect syntax and, above all, without modifying what could have been planned at the beginning. In fact, if this were to happen, there is a good chance that the speech would be based on the written word and would not necessarily be appropriate for the audience. Consequently, it is important to remember that speech is a constant work in progress and that it is completely normal to adjust, make mistakes, and correct. Students should therefore not be penalized for this. Capsule 1. What is oral communication? by Christian Dumais, full professor at the Université du Québec at Trois-Rivières,